Today on Jaywalking, it's solo walk. Jay's here. We're chatting. I'm going to tell you about some important male figures in my life, people I've met serendipitously, and talk about parenting and sort of the challenges, and even a little movie review of Iron Claw mixed in there. I don't know how we got here, but it was a fun ride. I hope you like it. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Enjoy the episode. All right, welcome back. We got another episode of Jaywalking. Just me again, just solo jaywalking. We're going to have some guests coming in, I guess, with my newfound schedule. Other people have work for a living, apparently. So weird. But yeah, so just me today, but we're going to kind of keep it rolling. I'm going to be talking about some new stuff today. I'm excited to share a story that kind of bounces off of last episode. If you caught last episode, if you didn't, you'll still enjoy the story anyways. Had a little bit of a crazy start to my morning. It was that morning you always worry about having where your alarm doesn't go off and you wake up like way late. So I woke up and it was bright outside and I'm like, oh, this isn't good. I mean, I know we just had daylight savings time, but I just woke up and be like, oh no, it was like 8:05 and my daughters have to go out for the bus at 8:25 and all three of us were still passed out. And it was just that moment of Home Alone where they're all running around the house trying to get to the airport. And I will say, when anybody knows this, when you have to lock in and something happens, man, even to their credit, the girls were awesome. They were we got it done. 20 minutes, dressed, hair brushed, it was bath night last night. So they were all already halfway there. And I was so grateful the night before, I do the laundry. So I had sort of a buffet of clothes waiting. And man, when you have to lock in, you can just lock in. And so we got all of that done. It was a whirlwind. So yeah, a little crazy morning, but I like it. You get the blood flowing, let you know you're alive. Everybody got to the house okay. Even Alicia dealt with it. The only issue we had is she went to grandma's house on Saturday because we went to a wedding. And so she has an Angel Sense watch that I mentioned last episode where it's sort of a GPS tracker and it's kind of like this cool little walkie-talkie. We can talk back and forth to her. Well, she took the charger to go to grandma's house and somewhere in the transition it got lost and we can't find it. So she didn't have a charge for today. And for her, if you know kids with autism and the ability for them to have patterns and routines when her watch wasn't charged. So I love that she was up in arms about it because it's so important that she wear it. It's so important that we be able to communicate and know where she is. So I really love that she was caring about it. But this morning, I did not love that she was caring about it because we have to prep her. I've talked about this before, but my wife's really good with this. And my wife's so patient and loving and an amazing person, but an amazing mom and an amazing teacher. And so I take a lot of my cues from her. And so one of the things that, I think the school also reinforces is this a big problem or a little problem? And, and you can see her processing. It's just it's a little problem, but she's still bawling her eyes out. And are we going to find the watch? Is it lost forever? And it's just she does this thing where because of the flight or fight kind of response, the neurological part, which is what the issue is, that's why they call it neurodivergent, that piece of it for her, she just can't help but go down the path of spiraling. And she just has this mentality where she hits the big red button, right? Her brain automatically goes to DEFCON 1 and pushes the button, right? And so that's where her head's at. So, I have to learn to not feed into that because anything I do can just gasoline on a fire. So remaining calm, repeating the phrases, taking deep breaths. Those are just things that I have to do myself, but helping her is huge. So, I'm grateful that I've taken to a lot of the instruction and the modeling that my wife does. But she got out today. She's a little tears, and I was able to kind of text her aide and be like, hey, just so you know, we woke up late and this happened. So, good luck. I'm sure she'll do fine. We just had parent conferences, for both of our daughters. And it's interesting being a teacher for, 21 years. I understand what it's like being the teacher talking to the parents. And so I always have a lot of grace for their teachers. And, their teachers are great. They're both, my Alicia's classroom teacher's fairly young, but really good, very sweet, and we're not having a ton of issues. Like in the past, we've had teachers who just didn't quite know how to handle her transitions, and she was still working it out. But we haven't really had as many issues. Everything's kind of they all know her pace. They know what she needs. She has a really good aide that's been with her for like 3 years now. With what a blessing! I mean, before this, she has like what's called an ABA aide, which is like I don't know, something like behavioral, something ABA. The B is behavior, and then there's an applied, and there's an associate. I don't know. There's something else in there, but it's a person who's there to kind of manage sort of the cues and keep track of the data of how many times she does X, Y, or Z, whatever we're tracking. How many times she has to take a break during the day, or how many times she cries when being asked to do something, whatever the goals are. She's there to kind of track that data so that we can kind of figure out what's triggering it and, just start solving for X. And so I had to warn all of them. But, it's been great. I mean, everything, we're nervous because next year she goes to middle school. And, that's a whole new beast. She's been in this building. I mean, we were nervous when she switched to this building in like third grade because she had been in a different school for kindergarten, first and second. Then the district said instead of having only one school that had an autism room, all the schools were going to have someone on staff so that the kids can go to the elementary school in their zone, which is great because now we didn't have two different buses picking up both our girls, taking them to two different buildings. And, so it made it a little easier too. So the girls get on the same bus now. And so now all that changes next year because Katie's going to still be in elementary for 2 more years. And now Alicia is going to the middle school. And so they'll never be in the same building again until high school, which is kind of weird to think about. So it's just they're getting to that age. And so, I mean, I've taught in the middle school for over the last 21 years. So it's just knowing what it's like to be a middle school teacher, knowing what middle schoolers are like. Everybody's been so kind to Alicia at her school. So I think that's really helped. I hope at the middle school that continues, but you just have that fear of the unknown. Like, what's that transition going to be like? Like she transitioned so well from third, fourth, fifth, and sixth now, but that was 4 years. Now she only gets 2 years and then it switches again. So, but that's life. She needs to be prepared for the fact that things change. So, we'll get through it, and we're trying to figure out, is her aide from the past 3 years going to move with us? There's usually a bit of a revolving door with ABA aides, but we found one that's, this is the job. Before that, we had found some younger ones who were just doing this until they finished coursework. So it was kind of nice to have Miss Kia, who she has now, because she just knows her so well. But, who knows what the next person will be like. So, so just a lot of unknowns, a lot of craziness. So it's just that's the kind of inner thoughts I'm having as I know my daughter is getting older and moving on, and not knowing I'm not going to be in the middle school. Because before I was like, oh, well, I'll be in the building in case she needs something or needs a safe place or whatever. But I'm not going to be there now. I'm not teaching. So it's going to be interesting to see. And, but, life's got a life. So she's got to figure it out. And this will be a good push for her to kind of see how independent she can be, how much can she get around on her own? And this is where we start to learn what's life look like for Alicia after high school. Is she going to graduate at 18 and go off to college? Is she going to stay till 21 like sometimes students with disabilities can, and then try to find a work program? Or, what's that going to look like? And so there's a lot of, I want to say fear, but there's also a lot of hope. Like, every time I thought she wasn't going to do something, she figured it out. We thought she wasn't ever going to get potty trained. We thought she wasn't ever going to speak. And then gradually, she took her sweet old time, but she got there, So it's going to be interesting to kind of see all of that. And then, Katie, on the other hand, someone who's got to be the younger sibling to someone who's neurodivergent. And, Katie doesn't know any different. That's been her sister since day one. So, she loves her. She navigates her world and how she reacts to it beautifully. And she's mature beyond her years. I'm sure she'll be back on. I talked to her about coming on and doing another episode with me. And we're going on a trip to Alaska soon. I got into a comedy festival in Anchorage. and it's over their spring break, so we're taking it as like a family vacation for 8 days. So maybe when we get back from that, I'll bring her on to recap our vacations because she's been so sweet about loving to go on vacations and feeling how lucky she is to get to travel around the world where a lot of her classmates don't. So, I'd alluded to that on the last episode that she had said this sweet phrase about how lucky she was. And so it's going to be cool to kind of see her take on it. So it's just fun to hear her perspective on things. And I try to be mindful of that as a parent. I don't know how you guys are, but like those moments when I know I'm losing my cool or I'm not being my best self, and I'm like, oh, I'm a model for them. I was watching a movie the other night, the Iron Claw, which came out in 2023. It was about this wrestling family, like WWE kind of wrestling, the Von Erichs. And I was always fascinated. Wrestling was like my life as a kid. And the whole story was super interesting about this family. And the guy from High School Musical was in it, Zac Efron. Man, he looked like he looked like a live action He-Man from the 80s. Like he really bulked out. It was insane to see that transformation. It was almost unrecognizable. But his character was so soft, and at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, well, it doesn't give away anything. He's sitting there with his sons who are playing, football in the yard, and he's just sitting kind of away from them in the grass, and he's just crying. And it was because his brothers he had 4 brothers, and they had all passed away, and his last brother had just died. And he was sitting there just crying, and the boys came up to him and were like, "Why are you sad?" And he's like, "Oh, I shouldn't cry in front of guys. Men don't cry." And the 2 boys looked at him and were like, "What are you talking about? Everybody cries. We cry all the time." It was just like this kind of cute moment. And he's like, well, the one kid's like, "Well, do you know why you're sad, Dad?" And he said, "Oh, I just realized I'm not a brother anymore." And I was like, "Oh my God." And then the boys are like, "Oh, well, we'll be your brother, Dad." And I'm like, "Oh, it's so cute." So it's just this moment of like, I don't know, it's just this moment of vulnerability where, I think having your kids see you be vulnerable is good. And I know Alicia and Katie get to see my wife and I be vulnerable. Sometimes it's hard when you're processing everything happening and you're trying to get ready for something, and Alicia's having a meltdown or something else is going wrong, and it's hard to hold in your emotions. But I think it's important for the kids to see you manage your emotions. But I think it also has to be like a teachable moment. It's like this balance of like, how much do you share? How much don't you share? Like, I don't know. It's very interesting. And I think the parent dynamic in that movie was interesting because the parents had this philosophy the whole time of like, oh, you guys got to handle things yourself. They were like very hands-off parenting. And, the very laissez-faire government reference. But I don't know. I feel like for me, I don't mind them seeing how vulnerable I am. I like them to kind of know those emotions and know that people have those emotions. And I think Katie does a beautiful job for how young she is of sort of figuring that out. I think it's good. I mean, I think about all of the people in my life, that were like stencils for me. And I didn't, male figures in my life were not someone who were around a lot. So I think about the ones that I had around. And there's one in particular that I definitely wanted to talk about today. He was the chaplain at Ursinus College where I went to. And the way I met him was like so serendipitous. Like basically I was a freshman and I had decided to take public speaking just to get it out of the way. Because normally that's an elective you would take at the end or whatever. But I had to take it in high school because I switched to the school my junior year and it was like a prep school. And so it had like 3 electives you had to take to graduate that were like trimester courses, so you could do them all your senior year. And so like one was like musical composition. What a nightmare, having to listen to classical music and tell if it was duple or triple meter. I still have no idea what that means. The other one was art history, which was kind of cool. And then the third one was public speaking. And these were all pretty standard college electives too. So I thought that was really cool. And I really liked public speaking. I had no problem talking, and I got to talk about baseball or whatever I wanted. So that helped too. So I was like, oh, I just killed it in the high school class. Let me take it freshman year. It'll be easy. Well, when I get there, apparently there was a senior who needed it to graduate, and I was the only freshman. So they were kind of like bumping me out saying, hey, can you give up your seat for this guy? And I did. But by the time that happened, now I had to go back and see, well, what classes were left, because now the semester was about to start. Everybody had picked their electives. A lot of them were full. And so the only one that fit the same category that was open was one called Philosophy 100, The Philosophy of Love. I'm like, all right, let's do this. And so they're like, well, it's taught by the chaplain, Reverend Rice. And in order to get into it, you have to have him sign off on it because it's after the deadline. Fine. So they direct me to what I thought was his office. It was called the Super House, but it was his house. He just happened to live on campus. And so I went and knocked on the door, and I'm thinking, oh, Reverend Rice. Okay, I went to Catholic school. This is going to be some old, frail priest. So I'm like, all right, well, I'll knock really loud so he can hear me. And I knock, and then the door flies open, and there's this like 6'2", 250-pound black dude, and I'm just looking up like, oh my God. He's like, what do you want? And I'm like, paper sign? Bring it to class. And he like slams the door in my face, and I'm like, wow, that was not the priest I was expecting. Turns out he was an ex-Navy Navy SEAL or Marine who then went to Harvard Divinity School after that. And so he was the chaplain at Ursinus. And so I took it to class that next day. And he walks in and he throws his briefcase on the table. He stares at all of us and he says, this is going to be the toughest class you've ever taken in your life. And I'm just like, I'm supposed to be in public speaking. Like, what are we doing? And it was the hardest class. It was the only class I think I got a B in for all of college. And did I mention I studied Latin? Like, he made you think in ways you didn't plan on. You read books that challenged the way you thought. There's a book that we read in there. Well, there was one. There was like one that was written by, I forget her name, but it was specifically written to like disorient you because the claim was that a lot of our thinking was based on patriarchal thinking. So the way this book was written was in a very kind of poetic spoken word style that you really had to focus on. And it was super interesting to just begin to understand that a lot of our thinking was patriarchal because men had ruled everything. So men decided how you thought, men decided what books you read. And so this was a book that was trying to fight against that. It was something like The Roar Inside Her was part of the title, but I still can remember reading that thinking like, wow, this is like, my brain is hurting. And then there was one book that I'll never forget that I've read a couple times since, which was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Just, and like the way he taught, was just, it challenged the way you thought. For example, one of the final project for the class was the three authors, Viktor Frankl, the woman, and then I think it was Dr. Martin Luther King, because we read a bunch of his stuff from the Birmingham jail and things like that. So basically you had to have a conversation between those three authors about what love was. And I'm like, wow, like this was pre-ChatGPT, this was pre-ChatGPT. So it's just, it's just you and your brain and a word processor. But man, I was like, that was so challenging to like dig deep. And that's how education needs to be. Like when we're talking now about people saying, oh, there's ChatGPT, there's AI, there's all these things. But, if you ask kids to do things that are unconventional, or you sit down and have like 1-minute interviews and talk to them, you can still save time. I know sometimes people's class sizes are crazy. So if you're like 40 kids in a class and you're doing 1-minute interviews, yeah, you may have 40 minutes in a class, but there's no way you're going to do 40 interviews in a class. So, it might be a 3-day event where you space it out, or a 4-day event. When I would do like oral exams, I knew realistically I was only going to maybe get 5 or 6 in a day. But, that might be a week well spent because, I really get to know what those kids know versus a paper that maybe they cheated and now it's not a true reflection of what they know. So, maybe not for everything, but maybe for benchmarks or at least twice a quarter, might be worth the effort if you also have a project that they're working on that they're continuing to learn even while you're taking this time out, So, but it was just interesting the way that he taught. And I also remember him too, because when I was freshman year, the other thing was we had 9/11 in the first week of school starting. So I had his class that day and all classes were canceled, but he put an email out saying, hey, if you're just alone in your room, or just, I'll be here. So if you want to come and, we can process this all together. And that was really cool because I was able to, go to that class and, he was the kind of guy that would invite us over for like dinner or like pre-study guide, study sessions, get to meet his family. So he was investing in us, not just as students, but as humans. And so like that was really powerful because like, oh wow, like this guy that I thought was so, mean and angry was a big softy, but he had this kind of tough exterior. And I think that fear component, like that kind of Machiavellian style of like, is it better to be feared than loved if you can't be both? But I think there's a component there that draws you in because now you're like, oh, kind of like the dad in the Von Erickson movie. He had that tough exterior, which I think forced the boys to step up and be independent instead of him telling them what to do. He kind of put it on them in a way that they had to figure it out. So I think that part of it is great, but it's a balance between that and compassion and being a human. And that's sort of what I learned from Reverend Rice was that whole component because he really invested in us. Like, and even after that class, like, he knew how hard we had worked and, he saw how some of us had been challenged and stepped up to that. And I remember because he called me in his office in the spring and, it was just nice to see him, but he wanted to talk to me about something. And it turns out he was also part of the advisory board for the admissions. And my scholarship was in question because I had missed a few classes in the afternoons. I was missing this one class in the afternoon, and they wanted to put me on academic probation. And he saw my name and said, well, let me talk to him. I know him. This isn't like him. And that was really cool because had I gotten a notice from the admissions people with no context or without someone like him to kind of buffer that, man, I would have hit my fight or flight. I would have hit the big red button and like been like, oh, I guess I got to leave school. I can't afford to not have a scholarship. And he just sat me down. He's like, hey, man, what's going on? Let's figure it out. And what we didn't realize is I wasn't trying to skip class. I mean, I was doing all my work and everything, but I would just fall asleep and then not plan on falling asleep. So I didn't set an alarm. And it turns out I had sleep apnea at 18, didn't know it. And so he had encouraged me to go to the doctor and get it checked out. And then we were able to submit that paperwork and everything was great. And it was just this moment of a guy that, looked out for me and went out of his way to kind of help me and make sure that everything was okay. And, it was powerful. And so I took care of him because I worked at the Regal Cinemas in Oaks. So he would come for movies and I would, if you had family come, you could say you had family like, oh yeah, my cousin's here. Don't you see the family resemblance? And I would get him free movie tickets when he would come by. And he actually, years later, was the one who married my wife and I when we got married about, I guess it'll be 15 years ago this year. Unfortunately, he passed away not too after that. He definitely left this earth a little too early. But yeah, what an instrumental guy that I serendipitously met freshman year and just was this kind of guy that I just was like, oh, that's what a man is. That's what a husband looks like. That's what an educator looks like. That's what a dad looks like. And I know from my own perspective, I think I'd met his son years later, and I know his son had a different experience with him, and that makes sense, like depending on where you're at, like I just said with my daughters, my daughters see us when we're in this frustration and they can hear us sighing and trying to figure out some of the snags as we're getting ready for stuff. And, you get an inside view. You get to see the director behind the scenes when they're in their trailer versus the director when he's on set. So, we're human. Everybody's got that angle to us. So it's interesting when people get to see us from all sides. I think the transparency is huge because that's where our humanity lies. So, but yeah, that was one of the major male figures in my life that came at such a crucial time, when I'm kind of figuring it out. College is like that perfect era and got me right on track and ready to do great things. So I was super grateful. So the way I can honor him is just by continuing to live my life with the integrity that I know he'd be proud of. That's how I can kind of honor his legacy and continue to talk and tell stories like I just did about him. That's what it's about. You want to create those kind of lasting memories. That's why I watched like the movie Coco, where like it talks about the culture of what a lot of like in Mexico where they celebrate Dia de los Muertos for the end of, the Day of the Dead, which is on like All Saints Day or whatever, but it's really just to remember your relatives. So you put out an altar, you decorate their gravesite, you go visit, you put out family photos, you make their favorite meal, you put out their favorite things from when they were alive. And it's really just an opportunity to talk about them. So if the younger generation didn't get to meet them, well, they get to meet them through the stories that are told about them every year. And so I think that kind of, memorial style is kind of cool, so that's that piece of it is something, to have a day every year where you just get to talk about some of the relatives that your kids may never have met. I mean, that's kind of a really cool tradition that, I don't know how many people think about that. We have people in our lives that were so crucial that aren't with us anymore, and we have fleeting memories of them here and there, but you want to honor them, and to have a day every year is kind of a really cool pattern, a really cool thought. I have another male that came into my life a little bit after that, was super instrumental, and it almost was like a dad to me. Was a dad to me. At a time I didn't know that I needed one, but he was someone who was he was a psychologist, and I was taking an ed psych class, and my teacher at the time worked in his office as part of her, she was just an adjunct professor, so she also took clients. And I was like shadowing her, went to the office, and we ended up having lunch together with him, and his name was Dave. And I remember just hitting it off at lunch. He was very funny, dry sense of humor, like, zingers or like little things you didn't see coming. And it was just it was just a nice person to have lunch with, just because there was always something to talk about. And he had dedicated his life, him and his wife, to like adopting kids who were from rough backgrounds or foster care. Two of his adopted kids were actual biological siblings, and their parents had been in jail, and like I think they had been on drugs when they were pregnant, and so there were defects physically and mentally. But they brought them in as if they were their own, and that was it, and that's all they ever knew. And so that was such a beautiful thing because they couldn't have kids. He was one of the last cases of like polio before the vaccine, and so it's sort of interesting how he ended up having 4 adopted kids. A lot of them were around my age. So he would invite me over for like family dinners, and eventually years later I'd go on family vacations. We went on a cruise together, and it was just kind of fun to be part of it. I was an only child, so it was kind of cool to feel like I had siblings, and felt like if I didn't want to go home from college, I could just go and stay with them or go do laundry or go have dinner. And so it was kind of nice to have this sort of surrogate family that, and he had said to me years ago, because I was talking to him about maybe trying to find someone to talk to more professionally and process all of the stuff after the sleep apnea and all of that. And, he said to me years later, he's like, I knew you didn't need a therapist, you needed a dad. I was like, oh, wow, that's wild. Like, and it was true. You just needed someone consistently there, to kind of help you. And my moms were great, don't get me wrong, but like, there's something about that. I think that there is a component of, if you're a male, you kind of are curious of what, and I think we're all human. I get it. Like I could learn a lot from my moms about how to be a compassionate person, how to fix things. I can learn from them all the things we would say are attributes of a male. I mean, they were lesbians, right? I mean, flannel and like fixing cars, right? Now, since they couldn't do that. But, I could learn how to mow the lawn from them. I could learn how to but there's certain things that I think when you're looking for a father figure, you need that around. So it's like, it's interesting. So I know for me as a dad now, it's like half the time I know it's just, we'll be there. If I'm there, that's already half the battle. And, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to slip up, but if you're thinking about it and you're trying to do your best and you apologize when you misstep, I mean, there's nothing better than, if you fall on the sword and apologize, anybody's going to want to give you another chance and let you do better. So, we don't have to be perfect, right? It's about progress, not perfection. And whether that's a sport, whether that's a skill, or whether that's just being a human, I think that's the nature of it, is you're going to make mistakes. When you do, fess up to it, apologize, own it, and then do better. And that's it. That's a simple recipe. But when you double down, and we live in a culture now where a lot of males that we're seeing in the media are doubling down on stuff, right? The big guy in the White House, he's doubling down. I will never say, it's like saying Macbeth in a theater. You will never hear me say that guy's name. But like, we know that guy just doubles down. Like they were talking about the Iran bombing, and they were asking like, oh, is that, did the U.S. military hit that, school? No, Iran did it. And then he doubles down on it. And then the news report comes out. It was like, no, it was a missile that was supposed to hit a naval base that happened to be near it. It's like, all right, well, stop doing that. Like it does not endearing. It's not, I don't know. It's like, it's the Von Erich dad syndrome, right? Like he's doing what he thinks is the best, but it's irreparable harm by like not showing the proper emotion, not owning up to mistakes. Like the thought that that means weakness is, to me, just crazy. So that's why I could never be in politics because, but then I see people like, President Obama, and I'm like, oh, well, you can watch this guy give a speech and talk about things in a way that you can talk about things, but not in a, somebody interrupts him at a rally or was like yelling for another candidate. And he acknowledged it instead of just saying, get him out of here, lock him up. He was like, no, that guy has a right to be here. It looks like he might have been a veteran. He's one of our elders. There's things we got to respect about that. You would never hear that come out of the other guy's mouth. And I don't see that as being weakness, but a lot of people do. A lot of, it's like I talked about this the end of last episode. It was this concept of, that guy's the optical illusion. Some people see him and see a rabbit. Others see a duck. Some people see the young woman. Some people see the old woman. It's fascinating about perspective, where you're from, what you value, what you think is important. And I hope we all start to see the same things as being important. I hope we all start to see the humanity of things and that you can cry, you can show weakness, you can do these things and not take away from your masculinity or your manhood or whatever the fear is. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to figure it out. None of us have the right answer. How can we all live here? It's a big planet with a lot of resources. How can we live here without, why do I have to take out you for me to survive? And we can get to a level where we can figure out how we all can just, enjoy ourselves, right? The John Locke philosophy, the British philosopher that I read in one of my freshman courses at Ursinus CIE that I talked about last episode. We read John Locke's second treatise on government, where he was sort of what the founding fathers were looking at and thinking about as they developed, our Declaration and Constitution, was you have the right to pursue happiness so long as it doesn't impede upon somebody else's pursuit of happiness. And that second piece is super important. Like there's a way for us all to win, and me winning doesn't mean you have to lose. Me being right doesn't mean you have to be wrong. If we can get to it where the game is played that way, then I think we all win. We all get to leave with our dignity. We all get to leave with our humanity, and we get to live our lives, and there's now 175 people that don't get to live their lives next to that base, right? Every day there's someone, dying from conflict of all sorts of ways. So if we could figure out a way to work for each other and with each other and not just, push the big red button, then maybe that's the world we all want to live in and can live in. So I don't know, food for thought. But hey, great walking with you today. Stay tuned for next week. See you later. Ciao.